to davidicke.com. One of the things I learned very early on in these decades of research into all these various subjects around the world is that nothing is as it seems. But the more deeply you go into it, you see that it goes much further than that. Not only is nothing what it seems, virtually everything, certainly everything of significance, is inverted. What it seems to be turns out to be the opposite of what it is. We live in an extraordinarily inverted society. And nowhere more does that apply to what is happening yet again in Israel-Palestine, with state-of-the-art weaponry being used to attack a virtually defenseless people in Gaza. The reason Israel is there at all is based on an historical claim that that land is the ancient home of today's Jewish people, and that it was promised to them by God, the Old Testament God. And this is what was stated in the 1948 Declaration of the Establishment of the State of Israel. The land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here their spiritual, religious, and political identity was shaped. Here they first attained statehood, created cultural values of national and universal significance, and gave to the world, the eternal book of books. Now, that line that I mentioned earlier about everything being inverted, well, there's no greater example than that, because that is historical bollocks. Today's Jewish people have absolutely no historic or genetic connection to the land today called Israel. And before anyone starts saying, he's anti-Semitic, here's a couple of books by Jewish writers and researchers. This is The 13th Tribe by Arthur Koestler. It came out in 1976, I think it was. And here is a much more recent book by Shlomo Sand, The Invention of the Jewish People. And Shlomo Sand is a professor of history at Tel Aviv University. And when you look at what they say, you look at what others who research this subject say, I've researched it myself, the conclusion is common and it is constant when you look at the facts. The Jewish people of today do not originate from the ancient land of Israel, but from a land, an empire in the Caucasus known once as Khazaria, home of the Khazars. And they almost certainly ended up there from ancient Sumer Babylon, what we now call Iraq, but you can certainly pick them up in Khazaria. And what happened was this. On one side of Khazaria was the Christian Empire. On the other side was the Muslim Empire. And the king of Khazaria, King Bulan, possibly to avoid being absorbed by either, had a mass conversion in 740 AD to Judaism. And the king of Khazaria was called the Kagan. And that is why Kagan is such a common Jewish name to this day. Also, when you look at what they call the Jewish nose, I mean, all races have got different genetic traits, and people talk about the Jewish nose or whatever. that is not a trait of Israel, the land of Israel. It is a trait of the Caucasus. And so what we're looking at is a situation in which a whole nation of people, the Palestinians, have had their land taken over on the basis of an absolute historical lie. Because what happened is when the Khazarian Empire broke up, not least through invasions from the east, Far East, those people converted to Judaism, who became intergenerationally followers of Judaism. They moved north up into Lithuania, into Russia, into Poland. And then eventually they moved across into Germany and Western Europe. And it was those people, by then known as Ashkenazi Jews. Ashkenazi Jews are the vast, overwhelming majority of Jewish people today, straight from the Khazarian Empire. They were the ones that were treated so horrifically by Hitler, and then moved to create the State of Israel in 1948, based on that historical lie, and also many to America. And Arthur Koestler sums it up in his book, The 13th Tribe, when he says this, talking of this situation about the origins out of Khazaria. It would mean that their ancestors come not from the Jordan, but from the Volga, not from Canaan, but from the Caucasus, once believed to be the cradle of the Aryan race. That's what we get the term Caucasian from, used for white people in America. And that genetically, Koestler says, they are more closely connected to the Hun, Uyghur, and Magyar tribes than to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Should this turn out to be the case, he says, and it does, and you've got to look at other people's research like Shlomo Sand, etc. Should this turn out to be the case, then the term anti-Semitism would be void of meaning, based on a misapprehension shared by both the killers and their victims. The story of the Khazar Empire, as it slowly emerges from the past, begins to look like the most cruel hoax which history has ever perpetrated. And on that cruel hoax has come all that has followed. I'm going to go into the implications of that today because it's got massive implications for what's happening as I speak. And that mention there of anti-Semitism is another one of those, inversion. Because the Khazars were not Semitic people. The term Semitic doesn't refer to a race, it refers to a language group. And that language group overwhelmingly consists of peoples and nations, wait for it, that today we now call Arab. So the Semitic races are the Arab races. And yet, to challenge the horrific actions of Israel, or to challenge the manipulations of the House of Rothschild and Henry Kissinger and all these people, you get called anti-Semitic, which again is a laughable inversion of the truth and the way things really are.